Hi, this is Carmen Havens, and I'm recording this on October 9th, 2024 from my home in Dublin, Ireland. I moved here about 4 years ago with my family of four from Denver, Colorado, but I'm originally from North Carolina. I was raised between Asheville and Raleigh, North Carolina, and graduated high school in 1989, and then soon thereafter attended the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York City, where I first studied fashion design and wanted to study art history. My background is always hard to talk about because I did not have, I think I came from a generation of parents that just looked at art and design as, oh, what are you going to do with that? That's not a legitimate career. And I hear that a lot from people my age. I'm in my early 50s, and a lot of us talk about how it was really hard to be an artist or seen as an artist, as a creative in our generation, that was just, frivolous. That was silly. You've got to have a career that you can fall back on. And so that was definitely a message I got growing up. My mother was an academic and had her doctorate degree, and my father was more of the creative one, very musically inclined and always playing acoustic guitar or saxophone, and had that in him, and came from a family of artists and musicians. In fact, I'm related on my father's side to American realist painter Thomas Eakins. And if you study American art history, you're going to come across Thomas Eakins. He's been called America's best realist painter. And I didn't really know I was even related to him until about fourth grade, when I came home and said, I've got to do this project on people I'm related to. Am I related to anybody significant or important? This is crazy. I can't do this. And my dad pulled out an encyclopedia and opened it up to the page on Thomas Eakins and said, you're related to him, and explained it. And I thought, well, that makes sense. I'm always drawing. I'm always sketching. I'm just from a very early age, just always had a pen, a crayon, a marker, something in my hand, and was sketching something. So it all kind of came together. But I came from that generation where, art design, and had this very academic mother, and it was just not viewed as valid or sustainable. And so I switched to psychology and went back to the University of North Carolina at Greensboro and got degrees in psychology and sociology, and then it was like, well, what am I going to do with this? And ended up getting a master's degree from Mississippi State in counselor education, educational psychology, and actually worked as a therapist, of all things, for several years, and quickly said, this is just not what I want to be doing every day. I was working as a therapist and then going home and painting. I had an easel set up at my table, and I would just go home and either paint or be on the floor designing some garment or a handbag, or there was just always something creative going on. And I thought, this is what I want to be doing for 8 to 10 hours or more of my day, not working in the helping profession. And I was okay at it, I guess, but I was not loving it, and knew I needed to make a change. So in 2001, I left that field and went back to New York, got a job, had a connection, and got a job in New York, working in the fashion industry again, working as a designer, and was quickly uprooted when 9/11 happened. I lived about 2 blocks south of the World Trade Center, and saw the whole event from my balcony, and was displaced from my home. And so I was, thrust right back into working in the helping profession. I'd been living in Atlanta, and I went back to Atlanta because I was displaced, and it was just very traumatic being in that situation, fairly newly on. I had only been back in New York, literally about 6 to 8 weeks when this happened. And so I went back to Atlanta and worked back in the helping profession. And I resented that. I thought, here I am defaulting to this again, and this is not what I want. And so by the time I got married a few years later, I told my husband, he was also a therapist, and I said, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm going to work in art and design while we raise the kids. And that's what I've done the last couple of years. As I've raised my children, I full-time went back into art, and just started painting and painting, kind of left the fashion industry behind and just kept painting, and found myself drawn to doing genre art. And I definitely think what I'm drawn to paint is connected to my background in psychology. I'm drawn to people and moments, interesting people, interesting moments. May not seem interesting to somebody else, but for some reason I'm drawn to them that moment. Some psychic connection between us. I'll stumble across people on my travels, or just, even in Dublin city center when I'm walking around, I'll stumble across people and I'll want to paint them. And a lot of times I'll have a conversation with them first, and we'll have a moment and something posed. But what I've learned over time is I prefer, if I stumble across a moment, to photograph it first before I approach the person and get consent or have a chat with them. And sometimes I don't even get a chance to talk with people. It's a fleeting moment. I'll photograph something and I'll decide if I want to paint it later. But usually I try to have a conversation and meet the person, and we exchange, social media handles and communicate through social media. But a lot of times I don't always get that chance to meet them, but a lot of times I don't want to interrupt the moment by chatting with them first and having something posed. I just want to capture the moment and what is appealing to me in that moment, because I'm trying to tell a story about that person, and I'm leaving it up to the viewer to analyze what's going on with that person in that moment. What's their story? I want to leave that up to the viewer to analyze and decipher. And, if I talk to the person first, I would interrupt that moment. So usually I try to just take some discrete photographs and then approach the person and say, hey, I'm an artist and here's what I do. And I show them my work and we have a chat, but that doesn't always happen. So, that's what I do as far as genre art. Some of my biggest influences would be Vermeer. I just am fascinated by Vermeer and what he captured so realistically, so beautifully, the value, the way he could capture light, and just those paintings just popped. I'm sure he used a camera obscura to really capture the value in the light. I mean, I think that's been proven, but the underlying fascinating story with Vermeer is, I think, his daughter Maria, which there's been a lot of art historians speculating, not a lot, but a few art historians are speculating that Maria was actually the person that painted Girl with the Pearl Earring and Girl with wearing a red hat, that she's actually the subject and doing a self-portrait. And if you flip those images, you can see the similarities. And I think there's an underlying story of Maria Vermeer that's connected to her father, and I find it fascinating. The Dutch masters in general, Rembrandt, Frans Hals, the Dutch masters were just fascinating to me. And I think one of my favorite museums to go to is the Rijksmuseum in Amsterdam, and also the Meritas House in The Hague. And just to look at Girl with the Pearl Earring and the city of Delft, those paintings are just, like, in person, they're just fascinating. And the potential true story of Maria being a subject who studied under her father and didn't get the credit that she deserves, I think that's fascinating, and I hope art historians keep talking about that and bringing that to light. So Vermeer's been a big influence, and Maria Vermeer. I love the story of, I'm not a surrealist painter into spiritualism or any of that, but I love the story of Leonora Carrington out of England. She was dating, connected to Max Ernst during World War II, and they fled and hid in a French chateau in southern France to try and escape the Nazis. and just their story and how she ended up in Mexico after the war, and he ended up with Peggy Guggenheim, and just her survival story and how she went to Mexico and really wasn't unknown until many years later. But she was a big influence in surrealism and didn't get the credit that she deserved. And I think she's just quite a survivalist. And I just love her story, and not drawn to surrealism, but I appreciate her. And I think just in general, it's not so much an artist that's my biggest influence, but a piece of art. I go to a lot of museums, and I just look to see what I'm drawn to. One of my favorite paintings I was drawn to in the Catalunya, the Museum National Art Museum of Catalunya in Barcelona. There's a painting there by Joan Ferrer Miro called Public Exhibition of a Picture. And of all the paintings in there, I was just drawn to this scene of a bunch of people outside an art gallery in the 1800s, 1880s probably. And they're looking at sketches that had been put up for exhibition in the window. And I was just drawn to this scene. It's a genre scene, and the cobblestone streets and the people outside the window. And there was just this one top hat this guy was wearing, and this highlight, a brushstroke, a white highlight on the back rim of that top hat. Just this, you could see it was just a nice curved crescent-shaped stroke on the back of that top hat, and I just beamed in on that. There was something about that one tiny brushstroke that made me want to analyze this whole painting, and it just stood out. And I've gone back to the National Museum in Barcelona, the Catalunya Art Museum, and I go right to that painting over and over, and I'm drawn to that scene. And I just think, for as far as modern contemporary realist painters, I like Guillermo Lorca Garcia, who just does these surrealist scenes that they're huge, they're massive in scale. And I saw them also in Barcelona at MoCA, and I'd followed him on Instagram and was just drawn to these very colorful, vibrant, celestial types. I can't even describe them. They're just so out there. And but his use of realism in those surrealist scenes it's just the skill level is amazing. And so I like him, and I like Michel Campo, another artist. I think he's Italian, but was living in Spain for a while. I think he might be doing a residency in the States right now, but his work is really fascinating too. So those people, past and present, are the ones that have influenced me the most. The painting I'm working on right now is a scene from a moment I captured, or I came across, I should say, in a little hill town in France called Cordes-sur-Ciel, and it's in the Tarn region of France. And so you get a lot of these hill towns. They call it the Tuscany of France. And you realize that when you're there, why they call it that, because they're just these little hill towns everywhere, kind of like you'd find in Tuscany or Umbria. And so I was walking up this hill town last summer, I believe, and came across this quaint bookstore with all these just stacks of books and records and little flyers pinned to the wall or the windows of the bookstore, and it was just beautiful. And this bohemian musician, this beautiful young woman, had sat down and was reading one of the books, and her guitar case was leaning up against the stack of books by the bookstore. And it was just this perfectly poised moment, and I couldn't have asked for anything better to paint. And so I snapped a few photographs because it just was so scenic and quaint, and she was just beautiful. And I thought, well, I'm never really sure if I'm going to end up painting it, but this was an option. And this is one case I didn't go up to her and say, hey, I'm Carmen, I'm an artist, and show her my work, because she was so deep in thought reading this book or flipping through this, it looked like an art book, that I didn't want to interject myself into the moment. So I just went on. And I did see her the next day performing in Albi, France, another town south of Côte-sur-Ciel, and I popped some money into her guitar case, and she said, "Thank you." I said, "Thank you." And we had our moment of glances, and that was our moment. And I thought, I wonder, should I interrupt? I had no chance to interrupt her again. She was in the middle of performing, and I went on. And so that was one of those instances where who knows if our paths will cross again, but I did not want to interject myself. I just want to paint the piece, and anything that anytime I'm going to paint somebody, especially without their consent or them being aware that I'm going to paint them, it's going to be in a very complimentary light. And always I would paint somebody in a complimentary fashion, something that highlights the beauty of that person and the beauty of that moment. So to honor them. So I just put trust and faith in that. And so that's what I'm working on right now. The painting I was working on right before the Côte-sur-Ciel painting. Actually, the Côte-sur-Ciel painting is so big that I've sometimes given a break. I'll give myself a break on that painting and do something smaller. So I had been in Munich, Germany earlier this summer, and I was in the like a sweet shop, it was at the bottom of the Galeria Marienplatz, so a department store, and it reminded me of going into Harrods and at the gift shop in Harrods. It gets in the basement, and there's just loads of gifts and goodies, and it kind of reminded me of a smaller scale of that. And my friend and I were in Munich and popped into this shopping center in the Galeria Marienplatz, and went into this sweet shop, and I just kept seeing this older gentleman searching for something, very intently searching for something. And he just had a sweet demeanor to him that I could not stop watching him. And he was probably in at least his mid 80s. I mean, he had to have been his mid 80s, and he was a little hunched over, and he had his like a satchel, a crossbody across himself, and a little navy jacket on. He was looking around very intensely for something. And then I caught him with his wife a few minutes later, right directly across from me. I was looking at some cookies or some sweets, and they were literally on the other side of this shelf that was open, and you could see they were right there. And I snapped a few pictures because I was so drawn to this elderly couple intensely looking for whatever, sweets or cookie they were looking for. And it reminded me of my grandparents, my mother's parents, who I was very close to, and they passed many years ago. And just the dance they had between each other. My grandfather, always assisting my grandmother with something and poking her and provoking her in these little jabs, these little humorous ways he would get her going. And her giggle or her response to him even into their old age. And that was their dance. And so looking at this couple and this man helping her find what she was looking for reminded me so much of my grandparents, and representation of all kinds of people across all kinds of ethnic backgrounds and age, all kinds of diversity. I really feel like we need to represent all in art, and I really was drawn to this older couple and wanted to put them on a canvas. And so yeah, that was a painting right before the Côte-sur-Ciel painting that was really significant to me this year. My biggest challenge of being an artist would be, I think we need to talk about gender when it comes to challenges for any woman in any field. It's our gender. I think when we're underrepresented by 30% in galleries and museums right there, that's a significant problem in art history, that we've got such underrepresentation. And that's changing when you've got the Femme Museum opening in south of France, where it's only showing the art made by women, past and present. I think that's a nice step forward to unbend that wrong. But I do think one of our biggest challenges as artists is for women. It's our gender and the underrepresentation in galleries and museums. So, and then you add ageism to that. I'm in my 50s and getting into this later in life. I didn't start painting again full time until my late 40s. And I mean, I'd painted my whole life, but and developed my skill, and I'm very skill based. I'm all about technique and skill, and I'm self-taught, but my bloodline and my genetics, I think, play a key role in my drive to be a very skill-based realist painter. And but ageism and gender are real things, and I think they're barriers. And just getting, it seems almost impossible to know how to approach a gallery. And if you don't know somebody, if you didn't go to art school and have your connections in your 20s and you're building on that, I think that's a real challenge. And I don't necessarily believe everybody does need to go to art school. And I think training and building on your skill is important, but I do believe there are people that, like myself, that are fully capable of. I think we're all self-taught artists. Even if we go to art school, I think we're all teaching ourselves based on our brains and what moves from our brain down our arms and into our hands and fingertips, and what we create. We're teaching ourselves to do that and to create based on what we bring to the world. And we're all self-taught to some degree, and so I'm not minimizing art training and art school. I've done some of it and I've been there, but I'm basically self-taught. But I think art school gives you connections, and I think a lot of people can build on those connections over time. And I think a barrier for me has just been coming into this late and kind of being confronted with some ageism and some gender bias that's just sort of built into our systems. And that does feel like a real challenge. The advice I would give to my younger self would be, I don't know. I used to think that if I could go back in time, I would say to my younger self, just stay on the track of staying in design school and not switching to psychology. I used to think that's what I would tell my younger self. Today, I don't think I would do that. I think my background in psychology and those years building skills around boundaries and good mental health and recognizing those things, good mental health in other people, is something I would never go back and change. That field is so interconnected to my art ability, and in a way that I would not take back. I wouldn't change that trajectory at all. So they're very intertwined today. And what I paint, why I paint, and just who I want in my inner circle, and maintaining my mental health and my stability, and because as an artist, I'm in isolation a lot. I'm in my studio, and I love being alone. I love alone time. I'm very introverted, and who I let in my inner circle, it's pretty tight, and it comes with a very clear, immediate understanding of another person's mental health and their good boundaries, and those are the people that I want in my life. I keep my world quite small and simple and healthy, and so I wouldn't go back and tell my younger self to change, to stay on that track, because this track I ended up on with psychology and getting my master's degree has become a very beneficial thing in my life. So I don't really know what I would tell my younger self other than just trust the process, just relax and trust the process, and just create. In any time you feel like creating, whatever inspires you, sit down and just do it. Just even if you're unsure, pull out the materials and just start creating and keep creating, and let the cards fall where they may. I haven't really used unconventional mediums or techniques, I wouldn't say. The thing I focus on is value in my paintings, and I use a lot of glazing techniques. And I think that's why my painting, I'm a slow artist. My paintings are a slow process because I'm layering and layering and glazing and, get one layer, go back and do another layer, and then I'm adding highlights, and then I'm letting that dry and letting that paint do what it's going to do over a couple days, over a couple weeks, and then I'll go back in and do even more highlights or some glazing techniques, and I'm just building up that value and trying to with low and high value, trying to really capture that contrast so that the realism really pops, but it also in real, like a lot of people will stumble across my paintings online and see a digital image of that, and they'll go, oh my gosh, it looks so real. I thought that was a photograph. And then I'm thinking, well, I'm not really a hyper realist painter. And if you see my paintings in real life, you're looking at a painting, you see the brushstrokes, but what I think I'm doing, and I think this is why I admire Vermeer so much, is just taking the time to really let things dry and glaze and add another layer and really try to capture contrast through value. And so I think that's probably what I'm good at and what I strive to be even better at. And so I don't think I'm unconventional. I'm just very slow, and my process is slow, and maybe that's what's unconventional. There seems to be a lot of fast art and a lot of marketing around fast art, and I don't like that. I'm a slow artist, and I believe in the importance of time put into a painting. I do listen to a lot of music when I'm painting. Anything from the Grateful Dead to U2 to Fleetwood Mac to, anything. I have an 80s, 90s mix that probably goes on 9-10 hours on my iPad, and I'll just put it on repeat and listen to that. And I also like, I like Tupac. I like Mozart, Vivaldi, Rachmaninoff, the opera Carmen, which I'm named after. I just have a diverse, eclectic mix on my iPad, and I'll throw that on sometimes. But lately, I've really been more into podcast, and I think I'm drawn to podcast that lean towards history. I love revisionist history with Malcolm Gladwell, and I like cautionary tales. I like anything by Pushkin Industries, and I'm a big learner, and I think it speaks to that desire to have the left side of my brain functioning at the same level of my right side of my brain while I'm painting. I've got the creative side flowing, and I can escape into that analytical side of my left brain while I'm listening to some podcast on history, or I also like anything by Rick Rubin, like Broken Record or Tetranomogram, I think is the name of his podcast, and he's interviewing other creatives and just listening to their stories. Oh, and I love the one with Julia Louis-Dreyfus, Wise Women. I think I think that's the name of her podcast. It's just brilliant. But so I think that speaks to my desire to have my left brain operating at the same capacity of my right brain. I'm constantly interchanging those two, which also speaks to the fact that I have my degrees in psych and have taught myself to paint. And so it's just the way my brain functions, I suppose. The best reaction someone has had to my work would be, well, one person teared up, and it was over a painting about the housing crisis here in Dublin. And that painting, I felt, well, the story of that painting is my husband and I are very purposely political when it comes to challenging power. And we believe in whoever's in power needs to be challenged. And so and that's wherever we live, whether it's in the United States or whether it's here, that the powers that be always need to be in check. And so the biggest issue that Ireland seems to be suffering right now is one of the housing crisis and the mismanagement of the government over the last 10 years and regarding that issue. And I think it speaks to what's going on around the world, that, the rich are getting richer and everybody else is scrambling. And so there was a housing march about 2 years ago, and my husband and I decided we would participate in that. And so I went and I took photographs of the different people marching with their banners and what they represented, whether it was, different political organizations to just different cultural subculture groups. And one of them was the Irish Travelers, which are highly discriminated against here in Ireland, and based on a 1963 document that came out that was very discriminatory, trying to force them to assimilate into Irish culture rather than Irish culture keeping and maintaining a place for that subculture. And so there was a woman and her 2 children holding up a banner for the Irish traveler community and their need for representation through this crisis. And I photographed it and the scene, and to later compose a painting and paint that moment. And I did approach this woman and we talked about it, exchanged information, and I did the painting, and we later connected a couple months later, and I was showing her the painting and of course made copies and prints for her. And she's a very smart woman, and her child happens to be autistic, and my oldest daughter is autistic, and we connected just as mothers raising special needs children, and our plight and other plights and that we have experienced in motherhood, and just connected as human beings. And it just speaks to, how we discriminate against each other based on things that are focusing on our differences rather than looking at our similarities. And I think that has to be challenged in art or through art. And so I was showing her this painting, and we were sitting in a cafe, and no one else was in there except the 2 people that worked behind the counter. And one guy came over and was washing the tables and happened to see the painting and wanted to look at it, and he started tearing up and expressing what the scene or the moment meant to him, and it was really moving, and I'd never experienced that before, and I was glad to be present with my own piece of art. My art's been in quite a few group exhibitions, and I'm not always there to see the reaction by people, the viewer. And so to see that reaction and to have him express what he was seeing and what it meant to him was quite a moving experience. What I hope people take away from my artwork is probably just a conversation about humanity and the importance of seeing each other. I think I want people to stand in front of a piece of my art and stay curious, look at it with curious eyes. Who is that person? What was that person doing? What was that person thinking? what is that moment causing me to feel? What do I feel when I see that scene, that moment, that person? I want them to be a part of the relationship. I think I'm the artist and I have a relationship with the person I'm painting, whether it's fleeting or whether I know them better than the fleeting moment. We have a relationship. I want the viewer to become part of that relationship. And I just want people to be seen. I want them to look at that moment and see the person, analyze the person, and walk away with feeling like they're part of it. And to me, that's just, it's connectedness. It's connecting all of us. And that's what I want my art to do, is to create a sense of connectedness and to have people thinking about the importance of connectedness.